Flag in the picture. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Arthur's Roundtable. We're super happy to have Angelina back for a second time. And we have her back for a second time because we weren't able to talk about everything we wanted to talk about in the first round. So we are going to start with the beginning of her journey and then talk about her business. And it's related to family offices and family office adjacent content. And so we're super happy to have you all with us today and Angelina back with us again. So thank you, Angelina.
It's my pleasure to be here. So for the origin story, like I shared last time, but happy to share again, I got into this business after I graduated from Penn State. I had worked in real estate as a commercial real estate broker and wearing different hats. I also understand mortgages and appraisals. And I came across a number of clients and realized that they were chasing the deal, but there was not anyone to help them with their legacy. And at that time, I didn't realize that there may have been a void in the marketplace. I just saw a need in just talking with clients. In other words, they're racing to accumulate and they have all of these assets. But then there's this question of, well, then what? Or if there has to be a succession, are all of the different questions related to meaning as well as, wealth is so holistic. Even regarding their happiness and joy, it's not just how well do you perform on a mouse wheel, even though I think in life, oftentimes we're trained that way in school, or if you've worked at a company like Goldman Sachs or even a commercial brokerage firm, et cetera, it's about an ROI. And I'll also speak about ROI later on regarding legacy planning. But I think that was something that came to the forefront in 2011 and 12. And I thought, well, surely there is someone in the marketplace that can help someone like Arthur, for example, design a legacy or even a next gen heir or a widow or a widower. And as you can imagine, back in 2011 and 12, I went to the internet and I could find coaches and consultants that could help a person lose weight, stop smoking, double their income. And at that time, I was, probably I would have been in my 30s then, early 30s. And so I was not necessarily at a retirement age, but I still asked the question in terms of what's called backwards planning in business, who can help me? And I couldn't find someone. And so it was a bee in my bonnet for a couple of years. And then in 2014, I sold enough commercial real estate that I was able to go back to school with the Coactive Training Institute. And I took a year off. I did all of their programs, executive education, everything.
Hey, wait, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Tell us what that is.
So the Coactive Training Institute works with Harvard University, et cetera. And all coactive means is doing and being. So there's a part of us that is productive, like what we do each day, but then there's a part of who do we be, which is also very interesting when you talk about the legacy conversation, because as one's wealth grows, it becomes, I think, less about what one does because you can retain people to do those things. The conversation then expands to, well, who do we want to be when it comes to things like alignment versus control, or even the preparation of heirs, or even if you're designing a legacy vision and whatever that vision is, who do you have to step into being? And then who is there to have those conversations with you, to hold up a mirror, but also accountability to say, okay, if you have a value around freedom with that flag in the background, for instance, well, who do you get to be when you're expressing the value of freedom? And if you leaned into it more, who is that person? Who are you being? Because it's a different energy that somebody embodies or takes on.
So that's interesting that there wasn't somebody like you aspired to be, let's say, readily available on the internet, but there was an academic construct for that. That's kind of interesting, isn't it?
It is. And I'm going to talk about that if I can during our hour together today.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So there are people, and I have found them in the last decade. And so there are advisors that help with that. Now, do I think that there's enough advisors? No, I don't. Because one of the difficulties, and you work with family offices, is let's say that 99% of capital that gets deployed is in financial due diligence, and 1% is in family retreats and personal coaching and family council meetings. And yet, if we look like, if we look at a family like the Rothschilds, for instance, the Rockefellers, whoever, Bernard Arnault, he's the founder of the LVMH, et cetera, et cetera. These are some families that they get their children engaged. But to many family offices, if they go to their client, that's a wealthy family, a founder, whoever, and they say, we'd like you to invest in family retreats and personal coaching once a week, probably the answer is going to be, great, what's the ROI? Is there a database that I can lean into if I'm going to set aside my time, my asset of time, to invest into personal coaching or family council meetings. Now, do we know that the Rothschilds have done very well? And again, I'm just putting them on the spot. They're not the only family, but they have survived, 15, 30 generations. I don't know the exact number, but you talk about this idea of like, okay, it doesn't make it past 3 generations. Well, why? Because you have to invest in human capital. But if you're going to invest in
Mhm.
human capital, who is out there? Have they made a strong enough argument? I don't like the word argument. It's strong enough point, offered enough evidence that
Business case, right?
sure, sure, to have, I think you work with what, 50, 100 family offices, and they've got clients.
Yeah. It's a lot more than that, but I obviously don't personally get involved with that many. But, we have 3,200 family offices that are members of FOI. It's big. And of course, I don't have 3,200 friends. I got a handful, but I get your point. Yeah.
So how I got into that was that I saw that there was like just a need. Now there are advisors out there, and I think there's wonderful positive role models. Jay Hughes, he was an attorney. He's the son of an attorney. He's worked as the wealth advisor to the Rockefeller. I think it was the Rockefeller family, and but he's very in touch with human capital, and I think that that's what legacy planning really is. You have to invest in the human capital.
Yeah. His book was lauded. I don't know which one, but as sort of the Bible of all this, right?
Well, I have his book over here. I said, I shared with you, I'm at my cabin right now, and over on my glass coffee table over there is his book about Telemachus. And it's this idea of, well, why do heirs disengage? Well, because they got to go find their identity. They got to go on that journey like Telemachus, and just they can't have their identity based on the family's wealth. I think you're a self-made success, if I recall correctly.
Well, some would argue success, right? Whatever that is defined as. But no, there was no legacy. My father worked in a paper mill, and my ancestors were from Greece, and they came over and started grocery stores, like, didn't expand into like Gristedes in New York City, for example, but they owned a grocery store and a butcher shop, and on one side of the family, and my other side of the family worked in paper mills. There was no family office legacy type money, never mind thought about that. Yeah. No, I decided this is not about me, but the inflection point for me was when my father got fired from a job at 55, and it just crushed him. And so I just said, I'm never going to have somebody take my name off the door. So it's been, nothing's ever been easy for me, but, at the end of the day, I've had massive losses and massive successes, and I'm ahead. So it's good.
Good, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
let me circle back to that moment in time. So I would have
Yeah.
thought that you would have hunkered down and focused in terms of the work ethic and the skills. One of the I sent you
Yeah.
and I don't know if
I
I should
appreciate
bring
it.
them up now or if I should just let you leave.
Sure, sure, bring them up. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah,
okay. I wrote to you, financial capital is the easiest to transfer. So how do you transfer and protect the other forms of capital? And there might be individuals that are listening that will say, well, what are the other forms of capital? And it's
yeah,
emotional and it's human capital and intellectual and spiritual capital. Because let's say, I'm just making this up. Okay. Let's say you have $10 million. It's just a number for easy math. Okay. And I presume you might have children. And let's say you pass that to your children. Okay, great.
yeah,
You have 3 children. So how do you transfer as well as protect that capital? And a part of that answer is the children have to be interested. They have to be engaged, but the parents also have to be engaged. Like if I go back to the example of Bernard Arnault with LVMH, he's got all 5 children sitting at that dinner table every night, and they're all heads of whether it's Louis Vuitton or Sephora or Fenty Beauty, etc. So he has his children engaged, but also it could bring up, well, if the children have it too good. Well, if you were watching what happened to your dad and his name got taken off the door or whatever the exact details are, woo, then maybe you didn't have it so good. So you're a little bit hungrier and you're willing to work for it compared to heirs that maybe have not had to work so hard or are not as hungry or is not as humble. And then all of a sudden you say, well, I'm going to bestow financial capital of $10 million your way. And if they say, what, now I got to work? Now I got to grow?
I think this is all super interesting because not unlike other things, the solution is not one that you can just apply to every fact pattern. It's idiosyncratic, a function of the fact pattern, right? So in my case, while I don't want to make it sound bad, my kids had a great upbringing.
Mm,
It was amazing. They think it was amazing. The lifestyle was, super upper class. They traveled well, they got a good experiences, they went to good schools, they played sports, they got enrichment in their lives, they were safe all the time, they knew they were. But I've chosen to, even though they're pretty clear that there's a pot at the end of the rainbow, they've gone on to create their own personas in their own
which is
lives.
great.
And I also will gladly throw in, because I got divorced at some point, depending on the age of, my son was like 13 and my daughters were a little older. I think that whole process created such resilience and the ability to adjust to change and have that skill set in their life going forward. I think many people think divorce is a bad thing for kids. I think it was awesome for my kids, and they think so too.
Because
But
change happens.
change happens and you build that muscle, right? And so they're have been, aside from ending up being New York City kids for, post college, they knew exactly how to fake left, go right. Okay, don't get upset about that. Let's figure out how to pick. I mean, they they became really, really resilient humans.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, like I said, had they been in a position where I said, okay, here's 10 million bucks a piece to go build businesses, that would be different,
I think you
right?
were engaged. So
I was well, I was I just want to be clear to the audience and you. I was very fortunate when I got divorced. I was a bachelor for 20 years. And what I mean by that is, people aren't going to like this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I didn't have the encumbrance of a wife or a regular girlfriend or whatever you want to call it, partner, that got in the way for in many ways, would have gotten away in many ways while my kids were living with me in New York City for all that time, right?
Mhm.
And then, of course, they went out on their own. But my focus was just to hang out with my kids while they were adults.
Mhm.
And so there was nobody tugging on me to distract me from that. And we all benefited from
So you got to mentor, guide, and groom them in the positive ways of survival.
it. Yeah. Yeah. As adults,
Mhm.
which was awesome.
And I still think
Yeah.
adult children need guidance. I don't think it's just 18 and good luck,
So
you're out there. Because it's like,
Oh, there's no doubt about that. On the other hand, what you were saying about, for example, the Rothschilds or Arnault, did you see the episode of Landman where Jerry Jones from the Cowboys was sitting by the bedside of one of the primary? Anyway, it's really an epic episode. And this segment was how this guy had built this massive oil empire, and Jerry Jones was one of his friends. Jones owns the Cowboys. And this guy was about to die on the hospital bed or could die.
mhm.
And he was, running through walls and driving hard and creating heart attacks. And Jerry said, look, the biggest thing in my life that mattered to me is that while I was also running through walls and building massive oil business and buying the Cowboys, my kids were part of the business the entire time. And that was his legacy,
Mm.
is he said, I prospered because they were with me.
Mm.
Right. It's a very, moving scene.
I'll have to check it out.
Good one.
So
I would. It's great. It's a great show also. I mean, the epic. What's his name? Taylor, whatever. He did the Yellowstone and all that.
So
Good
so
show.
I think what you're speaking to is that experience matters. So, like, with that wealth transfer right now, and then I'm gonna tie it back to legacy, I think that, if you can have your children in the business, then you're giving them real life experience, because real life is hard. Business is hard. There's surprises every day. In fact, I think I emailed something to you, I'm like, about surprises, because there's the surprises we can handle, and then there are the surprises that test our mettle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So
Yeah.
so if I go back to this idea of, what do I think you as well as your audience might want to hear about, or if I could offer any value, I just think about, well, how do you create engaged heirs? How do you make sure that they're going to be successful? And then if the answer is transferring as well as protecting the other forms of capital, well, then how do you do that? And a part of it is, like you said, okay, well, you spent time with your children, whether they were teenagers or adults. So a part of that is the discussions. Well, if they're at the dining room table and you're having meals with them, spending weekends with them, walking next to them in Central Park or wherever, then
Mhm.
it's that time where you can talk about things. Well, the marriage was tough, it didn't work out. And now here's how we rebuild. The marriage was tough and now I am finding my own identity. Okay, great. I mean, these are the real life things that need to be talked about. And the other part is, I plug the hardcover coffee table book as much as I can. If you can distill any of this in writing, so I think that your peer network, the Family Office Insights, is kind of a database. That's my presumption. So it's like you
Yeah.
can learn from, I call it institutional memory in the sense of whether it's a trust or a peer-to-peer network, et cetera. It's I've made mistakes and here's how I dealt with them. So future generations don't have to make the same mistakes. And so I think similarly when you're walking with your kids in Central Park, and you reflect and then you talk about it. And then I just hope one day that you write it down or they write it down or someone writes it down.
Yeah, it's germane to the subject, but I'm going to go off the rails a little bit here, but it applies to legacy as well. In this community that we have, the number one thing by a huge margin is somebody who wants to talk to somebody else that has had the same problems that they have.
Mm.
How did they solve it? And it's not that the advisors that can help solve that problem aren't valuable. It's just that if you're sitting across the table from somebody that's built and exited a business and now has $1 billion and they were thrown a curve for something, and I've got the same problem that I'm about to engage to solve, I'd rather talk to, and it's the number one thing that the family office people that I talk to say to me is that they want to talk to somebody and say, how did you solve that problem?
Mhm.
Or how did you deal with this challenge? And that conversation is the most valuable conversation that for as long as I've been involved in all this still continues to be the number one thing. So in the context of what you're saying is, okay, mother, father, or whatever, and parents often get ignored because they're parents, but how did you through your life, dad, mom, deal with this challenge so you can engage your offspring to help them understand how you dealt with these so they know how to deal with them. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
you're speaking principle to principle is what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's valuable. So let's say I'm sitting across from you, principle to principle, and I say, I'm going through this scenario. I've heard you've also gone through this similar scenario. Tell me everything. And then you have that download compared to if there's a third party that interprets, what it was like to walk in your shoes and everything you did down to the nuance. Because I think that's important. The internal conversations that you had in your head, the external decisions that you made. Now, having said that, I wouldn't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I'm going to advocate for all advisors and coaches in this world.
No, that's why I said that they're super valuable, but they're not as valuable as that other person. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah,
They they're required, they're valuable, they're really important, but they're not as valuable on this continuum of being valuable.
they're a great plan B.
Yeah. Well, or to integrate into this, right?
Well, I think that I think a team is needed. So people talk about this great wealth transfer. Okay, that's great for all of your neighbors and friends. But when it's personal to you, I think people need
Yeah.
teams because you look at the numbers and the statistics and you ask the question of why aren't the statistics higher regarding success rates? And I think a part of it is that learning curve of do you have the best people around you? Do you add the right people to your team? Do you know who to ask? Do they keep asking? Do they tap their networks to find people that can give you those answers? Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
there are the financial problems, but then there's also the human problems. And that's the complexity of,
Well, again, this is not about me, and I'm just giving you my 2 cents for
well, please, because it's got
that
to be
I'm
relevant and someone's going to relate to your experiences.
well, it's like the reason why there's so many people around to help you with the financial problems is because there's money. You're at the crossroads of money.
Mm,
There's a way to get paid.
hmm
The other stuff, there's not a cross section of money necessarily. In other words, I can help you pick your stocks because I'm going to get paid. There's a metric there that I can apply to glean revenue
hmm
from that transaction as it relates to the value I'm providing. The other stuff is harder to apply some sort of fee associated to because there's not money exchanging, right? There's not a transaction happening.
Are you talking about that if somebody doesn't pay a facilitator or they don't pay a fee for that
No,
family
no, I'm just
retreats?
saying no, I'm just saying that in the facilitation
Hmm
process, there isn't a money transaction that's gonna fund an advisor to do the work.
Well, they have to call people
When you're
like me
doing
or other advisors or
Oh, no, no,
JUs.
I'm not no, no, no. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get paid.
Are you talking
I
about the
wanna
RO?
make sure. No, I'm talking about if you're at where money is being a stock is being
Mhm,
bought, a stock is being
mhm.
sold, that's a money
Well, you
transaction.
can see the
And
evidence. It's measured.
Well, you can see the evidence, plus there's money there to to scrape off and get paid for what value you're bringing. On the other hand, there's when you're doing a facilitation and a conversation, there's money changing hands for your value. I'm not saying that that's not happening, but it's not a money transaction.
Well, it's harder to measure.
It's harder to measure, and it's because that there is not money being exchanged as part of the
Mhm,
transaction, meaning it's not about money,
mhm,
it's about something
mhm.
else, right? That's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
so I'm ready with a metaphor for that.
Do it.
Okay, so rest and relaxation, how much do you spend on rest and relaxation? And is there a measurable number of how much better you feel? Or so, I mean, I could have rest and relaxation, vacation, longevity. You left for a week to the Bahamas, and afterwards you feel refreshed, recentered.
Yes, and you can do that, meaning you can assign a number to that if you're paying attention, right?
Yeah. So I do think the ROI is trickier, but I do think about families, if I go back to the Rothschilds for a moment, that they have invested in their people versus things. And I think that's a really tough place where somebody gets to of if I keep investing in the human capital, is there the output that I need? Or what does that look like? Or what is it that I need to see? And sometimes you might not even have a problem child. I mean, if there's disagreements, okay, well, then that could fuel it, but there's still, I think, a proactive investment into the human capital.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. When you if you in your practice and in others, if you take a family that hasn't invested in human capital
Mhm.
and then decide that they're going to, and you fast forward 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, there's an obvious benefit to this. There's no question about it, right? I've seen it time and time again.
So tell me about some
Yeah.
of the things that you mentioned a moment ago that parents are invisible. Because I think there's something to be said. If there's a database when it comes to picking the right stocks or financial due diligence, or these were the deals that were smarter. I went with cryptocurrency. I did not go with cryptocurrency, et cetera. But then what about the database when it comes to human experiences? Like sometimes people call that policies and procedures if there's a trust, which basically
Mm.
just means something went wrong and here's how we dealt with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that that exists, does it?
Maybe with the Rothschild family it exists, or certain families, or
Yeah,
the
maybe.
Bernard Arnault.
Yeah. What I was referencing is that somebody a long time ago, while I was bringing up my kids, gave me some wisdom that paid off. It was how you say things to your kids, it seems obvious,
Mhm,
is as important as what you say to them. So when you know they're going to do something and it's probably not a good idea, rather than saying don't do that
mhm,
because they're predisposed to not listen to their
'cause they
parents oftentimes, right? As he said, you start with this. Say, "You're not gonna believe me." So now they're listening because they don't believe you. It's if you do that, it's very likely to end up like this. So go ahead and do it if you want.
Mhm,
But so it's actually a very clever trick
mhm,
and it worked,
mhm,
and I still do it to this day, and my kids say, "Well, you're doing it again, dad." So it's the trick is you're not gonna believe me, and then now they're listening as opposed to say, "Don't do that," and they don't listen,
mhm.
right? It's kinda childish, but
Takes the pressure off.
it actually
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think, one of the questions I sent to you was around, like, why do heirs disengage? Why do families fragment? And a part of that is also that you have to invite other people into the conversation. So I think even when you say to your children, "Hey, you're not gonna believe me," it's not like you're asserting control. So I came to this conversation with a metaphor, and the metaphor has to do with, and I think you are probably a very fair parent in the sense that you may have not exerted control. I think you probably offered guidance, but there are some families that exert control because it works. And the metaphor that I brought was, you know, about herding cats. Have you ever tried to walk
Mhm.
a cat? And then
Yeah,
and then if you put a harness on a cat, but now you're dragging the cat.
right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge. There's, how many people have you met that fall in the camp of not knowing that they're, wildly narcissistic,
Okay. I might call that
right?
wildly wounded. Keep going.
Okay, well, that's
Okay.
true. The healing problem,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And until they decide that they wanna do something about that, it's kinda hopeless.
And they rarely do if they're truly a
Yeah,
narcissist. Okay.
yeah. So, how do you deal with that matriarch or patriarch that is a massive, not self-evident narcissist, healed, non-healed person?
Mhm.
How do you is there a way of getting that person to invest in the people and decide to have, do the work to have a legacy so people can understand how to be engaged with the family.
So it would come down to what motivates him or her. Because if it's an heir, you could use money to motivate that heir. But if you're talking about the patriarch or the matriarch and they are the money person, oh, should I do
Yeah.
anything with the timer at the top? Oh, no, I'll just ignore it then. It just showed up. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I
It's
think it
okay.
comes
Yeah.
down to if it's an heir, you could offer money and that could motivate them depending on if that works or not. A lot of times it works. It's the carrot on the stick. It's the reward. But if you have
Yeah.
a patriarch or a matriarch, what else could motivate them? Because even with narcissists can actually be very easy to control because many times they're motivated by shame. And that's not necessarily, I'm not saying to go in and manipulate them. I'm just suggesting that when you take kind of take a step back and you look at what motivates them, it might surprise. Like sometimes fear motivates someone. And again, I'm not saying to be ruthless with them, but if you go back to the cat, food could motivate a cat compared to
Mm-hmm.
punishment. So with narcissists, there's often been a moment or moments, plural, in their life where somebody whipped away their power and they felt powerless, and now they've developed a mask to overcompensate. And that mask
Uh-huh.
could be, as you've probably come across in business, and I've come across in business, it could be really malignant. It could be very cunning and dark. Like like here's the front side of business and here's the back side of business. And if you've been in business long enough, you've seen the front and you've seen the back side of business. The good side and the ugly side, the light side and the dark side. So I bring that up because with narcissists, depending again on what motivates them, you can lead them if you figure out what's their food, like going back to the metaphor of the cat.
Yeah. Or is it better to just cut and move on to the next client? Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to say yes and no. So a lot of experts will say, go no contact with a narcissist. And sometimes you can, and sometimes that's the best. But here's the reality.
Mhm.
We swim in these waters where we are surrounded by narcissists today. I think that there was, it was one of the earliest guests on my podcast. He was from, I want to say Brazil, somewhere in South America. I can't place it right now. And he talked about narcissism being this influence of leadership in the 21st century. And many narcissists are at the top of their industry because what allowed them to be good is that they are running from this shame of I am not good enough. And they will become the
Mm.
titans of Wall Street, or they'll become the founder, or they'll become that entrepreneur. And they will be amazing salespeople because again, they're getting driven by a fear and a shame we can't see on the outside. Because they might become they could come across as like the life of the party.
Often do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
often do. And so if we're talking about this idea of a legacy, I think some of them will have what I might call a come to Jesus moment when they get closer to their death. Because sometimes narcissists, the older they get, the more isolated that they become because people don't want to put up with their hot air, their drama, their being a pain in the beep.
And they're not as capable as they once were as they get older to execute on their horror.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, right?
So I mean, I could, and I'm not going to make this like necessarily a political conversation. And I'm not registered to vote. I don't go to rallies or protests, so I'm just going to say that up front. But there are some politicians and that are narcissistic, and I think
Some,
well,
some.
sure, sure. And
Yeah.
so I think again that there is a skill set to be developed because we swim in waters where narcissists are not going away. So then how do you do that dance to get what you need, but also not get sucked into the vortex? And I bring up the vortex because, and here's another metaphor. Like, let's say the planet Jupiter has a lot of mass and I'm a smaller planet like Pluto or something like that. I think Pluto's still a planet. I'm not sure. It's how well do I know myself that if I get around Jupiter, and sometimes narcissists can have big, gigantic personalities, a
Mhm.
showman or a showwoman or whatever. What is it that I need to know about myself before I go into that landscape, that battle where I'm around Jupiter and I don't get sucked in?
Yeah. Self-awareness. So
Because they'll
I
know
want
my
to
buttons
just,
if I know theirs. I'm just saying it works both ways
it does
in
work both
self-knowledge.
ways.
Sorry.
So I have a book that I'm going to just mention that I read because I was often surrounded by narcissistic people and still am. And so someone recommended a book, and it's not written by a clinician or a doctor. It's written by a self-proclaimed narcissist. It's called Malignant Self-Love,
Mm,
and it was brilliantly
I'll
written.
have to check it out.
And it actually helped me deal with those
Hmm.
people, but not getting sucked into their orbit,
Hmm.
right? Is really the preface of the book is if you meet somebody that has these characteristics
Hmm.
and it basically it's hopeless, walk away. That was the beginning of the
Well,
book,
that's the
right?
easy thing, and people like in
Yeah,
terms of polarity, they like the easy, which is also why
yeah,
designing.
of course they do.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I said, of course they like the easy, yeah,
Well, that's why even if you go back to you spoke about communication a while ago, that you said to your children, "Well, you're not gonna believe this." Well, if let's
yeah,
say you go up to a founder and they're really successful, we're talking millions of dollars, and money, like success and failure, are amplifiers. It's just gonna make them more of who they are. Now, whether or not you say that to their face is another thing. There's some moments where you have to have the inside voice. But I bring that up because in some ways you're asking them to continue to grow. So if they, instead of bossing their children around under control, and I go back to that idea of the cat on the harness, you're dragging the kid because you put the kid on the harness, and the kid could be 15, 25, 35, 45, etc., 55 even, because parents
mm,
still sometimes see their children as 13 forever, right? Yeah. So I bring up that point because, yeah, I just lost it for a moment. It's on top of my mind, that they have to, in terms of the growth mindset, that they still have to be willing to grow. And I'm not asking them to carry around a tape recorder, but if you say to them, listen, you are really successful, but now you have to learn, you have to look at your communication skills. You have to humble yourself enough to invite your child into that conversation. So that
mm.
gives them the freedom. And then
That's a good point. Yeah,
but let's say you're narcissistic, for example, and I say to you, you got to work on your communication skills. The first reaction is going to be defensiveness, rebellion. I don't want to change. I mean, I could even bring up if someone is spiritual, growth is a little bit easier. If they're not, if they don't have a sense of a spiritual life, there's something called the ego-based intellect, and people can get really set in their ways as the decades progress. Well, it's worked
mm,
this long, this well for this long, and now you're asking me because the world is faster. People now have opinions, and my children are now rebelling. And now,
yeah, and we didn't have the internet
yeah.
for
Yeah.
a long
So I,
time,
I
right?
bring up that point because a moment ago, that book said, oh, just walk away. Well, people love black or white, left or right.
Mm,
They love simple. And so if humans love the easiest path, now you're asking, well, if you were willing to sacrifice for your business and grow through the school of hard knocks. I mean, when I'm saying growing, like you talked about massive losses, the type of losses where you go inside your car and you scream type of losses because the world is unfair and somebody just took a piece of your stomach out because it's so,
mm.
what they did was so selfish. It was borderline evil because business is like, yeah, you add that comma or that zero and crime is no longer walking down a dark alley and worrying about a baseball bat. Somebody just did something to you because you're sitting at the table and you didn't know something and they smiled and
Mm.
they, added a comma or took away a comma and now you're dealing with the effects. And so, I'm bringing up that, if you were willing to get back into the arena and work because you didn't want to lose that business deal or whatever that business transaction was, or your peer-to-peer network or whatever it is, are you willing to have that same commitment to have great communication skills?
Yeah, that's a challenging question.
I go back to the reward. What motivates that person?
Yeah, find out. What's really interesting, and I imagine that you do a lot of this, is rather than tell people things, you ask them a bunch of questions,
Yeah, because
right?
then their mind looks for the answer and
Yeah.
yeah, and then they own it.
And then it also reveals to you what you're hoping to find to help them. So let's talk about that a little bit. What's the what do you find? I mean, let's just make the business case for what you're doing. Where do you find the best entry points for you to be engaged in a way that's meaningful for you and meaningful for your client? Or is it the trusted estates lawyers? Is it directly from somebody else who's a wealthy family that's experienced your business and what you've done for them? What's the sort of not pedestrian, but the basic business development type things that work for you.
Yeah, referrals are great, and ironically enough, there are people that have watched my podcast, and they will see the face of someone talking, and then they'll decide in that moment, maybe after 3 videos, I don't know how many, about whether or not they
Yeah.
trust that voice or that face, and then they'll book a discovery session on my website. That's one way, and I thought, "Oh, that's so interesting that somebody could watch a video and decide in that moment." And then other times there are referrals, and referrals are great. A referral could come through an attorney. Referrals could also come from, like you had said, principal to principal. There could be an individual that is a Rising Gen member, and they can say, well, I'm already working with someone, but my friend here, and then they refer their friend over to me over like via email or something. And then that friend will come forward and say, I'm stuck, and here is where I'm stuck. And I always find it interesting how human it is in terms of that when there is a wealth transfer, for instance, there's like a new, it's not just like they're being invited to a new identity. And like you had said, maybe their parents are invisible because why aren't they going to their parents? But maybe they
Mhm.
don't go to their parents because they don't want to look weak or vulnerable or whatever their reasons are. But it's also, it's like a brand new skill set. Like I'm now invited to be an entrepreneur. I don't know how to do that. How the heck do I do that? I
Mhm.
don't know what I now want, and I'm expected to know what I want. So I think
That's it.
sometimes it's the hunger on the part of the client because it's like they're at a place in their life where they're going, okay, shoot, I need some more help. Who do I go to? I need to get some feedback because there's expectations on me now. And then there's other moments where, yeah, I think that there can be a referral through an attorney, let's say an estate attorney, and they could say, well, I've got this client in my office and they're telling me about A, B, and C. I don't know how to help them. Can you help them? Or I
Yeah.
don't want to step outside of my lane of traffic. I'm really good here.
Yeah. It's probably not a good example, but oftentimes when people go and see psychologists or whatever to get some help, it's because the argument is that there's somebody who doesn't have skin in the game.
I think
Like
that's
you
great.
can't go,
Sure.
yeah. And I think it's true in this case as well. I can talk to my business partner. I could talk to my husband, my wife, my parents, my siblings, other people on the advisory board for the family office or whatever, but they all have skin in the game in some way. And when people say they don't have a bias, it's a lie. We all have biases. We just don't reveal them all the time. And so if talking with somebody like you is you're getting paid to have an independent view on a fact pattern that is not
Yeah,
yours.
I might
That,
amend that slightly to say I'm paid to add value.
yeah,
Yeah,
fair
which
enough.
is, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but which is also why, like,
Sorry.
when I emailed you, I'm like, "Can you send your questions ahead of time?" Because sometimes there is this skill called dancing in the moment, and there's other times where if something's really important, you just don't dance in the moment. You'll go in prepared. So that's
Yes.
where I go back to this idea of adding value. You just don't take someone's money. You look at like what is it that they're dealing with, you ponder it ahead of time, and then you go into that conversation and you say whatever you need to say to them. And we all know conversations never go as planned because new things come
Yeah,
up.
totally.
And then you can walk away from that and go, okay, well, this is how it turned out. And now I'm going to email them or have a follow-up phone call or whatever, and then say, after conversing with you for an hour or whatever that 90 minutes or time frame is, I'd also like to add the following. So that's what I might
Mm.
just reframe it a little bit that I think the job of really good advisors and coaches is to add value and to have our own
Yeah. Oh,
database of like, okay, well, we've walked the floor regarding our life experiences, and here is what we've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, because that is what life is.
add value and also have no compelling reason not to be honest.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. I wanted
Right. You're not hiding a secret agenda saying, okay, I don't want to say that because it's not going to allow me to do this. Right. Because oftentimes when you're having a business conversation, it's about positioning and not bringing something up, or it's lying through omission. And I'm not saying
no, but
lying.
you're
I mean,
absolutely, you're hiding something that maybe you're not going to say something to that other party, even if it could be to their benefit, because you might not want to offend them or
or you're using it as a negotiating chip later.
sure, sure, sure.
Right.
One of the questions that I emailed you is what causes family fragmentation, as well as why do family constitutions fail? And I'm just going to say, kind of piggybacking.
I appreciate you doing this because one of the things that I know, we don't know what we don't know. If there was a teleprompter in front of me, I would completely fail. Right? I just not capable of doing that. And so I appreciate you bringing up these questions because otherwise I'd look at them and just read them, pedantically, blah, blah, blah. Right? So I'm glad you're bringing them up.
Okay, good, good. I appreciate that you're willing to like allow me to like
Yeah,
co-lead
of
in this
course. Yeah,
conversation. Okay,
it's your show.
well, so why do, families fragment? Disagreement, one word. And then it's,
Yeah.
are you going to deal with the disagreements or, and disagreements mean sometimes I don't want to listen to you.
Look, can we just call it what it is? The reason why family members don't get along oftentimes is because they have a history of behavior that I'm not going to tell my sister this because I know based on my history and her behavior that won't go well.
Mhm.
So I'm just, and it- so it's a, your family has most of the time, they're the biggest history with you.
Yeah. So I would add to that of disagreements. Sometimes it is rebellion. That's like when you went to your children, you're like, "I know you're not gonna believe me, but" so I would add to that, that it's not necessarily selfishness when there's disagreements, but sometimes people will do the opposite, whether it's justified or not. And because we're just talking about
Yeah.
human nature and the human condition. And so
Yeah.
that brings me to the next point of, well, then those parents, or if you're in a relationship with someone or that business meeting, I'm gonna say, you gotta deal with it. You gotta deal with the situation or situations. And here's the next part, or not. And sometimes people don't deal
Right.
with it. And like you had just said, all right, well, that there's a history with that relationship with that sister or brother or whoever it is. So did you deal with it? Well, no, 10 years went by, 20 years went by. I never gave them that
Yeah.
gold star or told them that I was proud of them, or I never withdrew the insult that they look bad in the khakis versus the blue jeans or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. It's
yeah.
fun.
So and piggybacking on what you also just said, okay, why do family constitutions fail? It's like what you just said. People insert their own agendas. Have they even read the Constitution? Do they know what it means? Secondary to yeah, but they
Yeah.
insert their own agendas.
Yeah. If they're not bought into a family constitution, then they're not going to, like you said, perhaps even read it, never mind adhere to it. Like they're going to say, oh, that's bullshit.
Correct.
I don't, yeah, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Right.
That and are they equipped to
Yeah.
follow it? That was the only other thing I wrote down regarding that. And equipped could be skill sets, equipped could be buy-in. I know you're not gonna believe me, but I think it's still recording. Okay.
Exactly.
I know you're not gonna believe me, but and then you kinda draw in their buy-in.
Yeah. And, I think there's merit in knowing your family's history and how people tend to behave. And from time to time, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they won't behave that way, giving them a chance to demonstrate that maybe they've thought things through a little differently and that they didn't do what you think they were going to do just because that's the way they've handled it in the past. So you give some grace, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And going back to the family constitution, or even like you had said, in going forward and sharing notes, principal to principal, I think there's something to be said about, are there agreed upon goals? Like, we're going to move forward as a family, even if it's just yourself and your three children. Well, we've got some agreed upon goals. So you have what I call goals by agreement. Because if not, we're all moving.
Buy,
Go ahead.
all buy, right?
Well,
Buy-in,
right.
right?
So I'll give an example. I don't know. Let's say for a moment that you had a house outside of New York City in the suburbs, and you wanted one of your children to mow the lawn, but you didn't get their buy-in. So they mowed it, but then they chopped down all your bushes because that's the
Mhm.
rebellion. It's like, okay, I'll do what you say, but I might destroy your yard. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Take that.
Right.
Take that. Seen that happen.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'll continue with some of these questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Please do.
So I brought up to you in building a trusted community, which I think is what Family Office Insights is. It's that peer to peer network. I wrote to you, what do you hope FOI still contributes 50 years from now? And it's that database. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it will. I don't think it'll exist. I don't think it will make any contribution going forward, largely because, and this is not, it's just practical. It's like without me being active in it, there, there might be like a way to work it into like YPO or Tiger 21 type thing, but I have no interest in doing that
Mm,
for a lot of reasons.
mhm,
And so I think that Family Office Insights community will end.
mhm.
Part of the business that we do will prosper and grow and may not be tagged as my legacy, and I don't really
Mhm.
care because there's an exit in the offering for that part of it. There's a different so the peer-to-peer thing will evaporate
Okay.
over time, or somebody will buy it.
And take your spot.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm irreplaceable, I'm just saying the two components that are valuable to the community are the peer-to-peer thing and the deal flow. The deal flow can be built into a scalable business. The peer-to-peer thing would have to have somebody that would be really interested in digging in deep. And I just don't see it happen.
'Kay.
And I don't really care. Like and I have the benefit of not caring that much because I have 15 other things that are economically valuable to
Mhm.
me that are Family Office Insights went away tomorrow, it wouldn't change my life.
I think it's a
And
contribution to society, though.
yeah, not sure there is one,
I think in terms of education.
maybe. I will tell you that the content that we have on the podcast, let's just talk about that, which are very new and small, is huge in terms of wisdom from the guests. And that's already been demonstrated. And it's far and away better and more valuable to people, it seems, than the thousands of recorded pitch videos that we have on Family Office Insights of somebody saying, we have a real estate fund and we're pitching this and you're going to make money.
Mhm.
Like that's okay. So what? Right. So I think these will have some lingering IP value, but we'll see. So that could be some contribution to the society. But the thing that is valuable for the peer-to-peer stuff that happens is I don't think it has lingering value except to the people that have benefited up to this point, like the people they met, the business they've done together, the relationships that they enjoy, the traveling that they've been able to do with people that they've met as a result, the deals that can get done. So it has maybe some societal benefit, but I don't think you're going to be able to stand up Family Office Insights and say, wow, what a contribution to society it was. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I think in terms of society, maybe behind the scenes, because it's a very niched market. And what I mean by that is if it's kind of like there's a loneliness epidemic in the world today. And then you go into a world and you add money to it. So now people have their guard up because they're worried, well, what do you want from me? But if you can
Exactly.
create that peer-to-peer network and one principal goes to another principal and they say, I'm dealing with this. And it could be something heavy and serious, or it could be, I'd like to get some rest and relaxation. Where do you suggest I go? And
Right.
they
Yeah.
say, I know this resort and it's amazing. Then it's something that then I think that in terms of it helped that person find their life force energy again, or it helped that person continue to learn and grow compared to just staying, what I call like invisible or living in a silent world of desperation or
Yeah.
because everyone wants to be
I could
seen,
totally see.
heard, and understood.
I can't I can't share specific examples of other people because it's not my place to do that. But for me, it's been hugely valuable. Let's just talk about the example that you just used. I'm in Sicily. I know that a friend of mine has a place in Sicily. I didn't tell him I was going.
Mhm.
I say, "Hey, I'm in Sicily." He's from Luxembourg, but he has a place in Sicily. And I said, "Hey, I'm in Sicily. Where should we go eat? Like, tell me where we should go." And he goes, "What? You're there? You didn't tell me you were going? Here's where all the places you go. And the key to my place is with the handyman or whatever it is. Go and stay there as long as you want."
Mhm.
Right. And not only that, everybody that he has that helps him while he's there was helping us. Right. Drivers, restaurants, places, food, the neighbor, right? All that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. So that by itself was enriching to me. And that happens all the time. Right. And so the other thing that is, I'm resisting talking about this because this is supposed to be about you.
No,
We're
no,
talking
talk
about
about you,
me.
and I was just gonna add, you just it was joy. It was joy got manifested right there. That is and it is
Totally.
self a legacy. Go ahead.
And it turns out this guy's like he looks like the Romanian mafia. He's a half Romanian, half
Mhm.
Italian. And if you saw him, you'd run the other
Mhm.
way because he's like 6'6" or whatever
Mhm.
he is. But he's the gentlest, nicest, smartest lawyer. Works for one of the biggest REITs in the world. He's just a solid
Mhm.
dude, and he was part of the family office community, right? And so, but the real value of Family Office Insights to me, and I've been criticized regularly for not monetizing more than I have, is that I don't have endless amounts of money.
Mhm.
And so when I want to put $5 million into something and I only have two, I can rally three more, it's just easier than
Mhm.
most. That's all.
Mhm.
People take my money.
Mhm.
So I've resisted taking that corpus of people, the relationships, the moneyed, smart investors and family offices, and leveraging the shit out of
Mhm.
it just to make
Mhm.
money, right?
Well, that's good.
I'm just not
Well,
yeah,
I would say you're trusted, that you're not gonna just exploit somebody just because you can based on of greed. Just because I could, I did. Maybe you shouldn't have had.
yeah,
Maybe you should have yeah.
yeah. Well, I do exploit it, but in the way that I described to you with full
Mhm.
transparency, right? That's
Which
all.
is good. There's a skill around self-management. Some people, if they
That's what I tell my son, govern yourself. And he looks at me and goes, yeah, sure.
well, there's something about perhaps past life experiences, seeing what your dad went through, that you're not gonna just take something for granted, that you'll cherish it, that you'll hold it in kid gloves, like when you stayed, I presumed, at your friend's place in Italy or wherever it was, that if you did stay there, that you were very respectable or respected, his space, his belongings.
We always leave it better
See,
than
this is what
when
I'm
we
talking
arrive.
about,
No,
which is
yeah,
something that I mean, I
that's the only
remember
way.
growing up and hearing that from my parents. Like, "Wherever you go, whatever you do, leave it better." Does that next generation have
Yeah,
it? I'd like to think that they have it, I don't know. Was there someone in their ear saying, "Leave it better, be as respectable as possible?"
it's a good habit to have.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think a part of your legacy is that you didn't exploit it, even if you could have,
No, no,
that you could have taken it.
no. Yeah. Well, there's other facts, but it's largely because it didn't serve anybody well to exploit it in that way, including the members, right?
I think, and I'm gonna go back to, and I know we might have to wrap up in a moment, but I remember back in commercial real estate, you were gonna bump into the same people again. And some of the smartest investors, if they realize that they're gonna bump into the same people again, make it a win-win. Don't just take because you saw that opportunity. Because if you do bump into that person again and now it's awkward because you took 5 million from them or 15 million or that building or whatever that thing was, because I mean, human nature is human nature. And there are some people that if you wrong them, they'll use their last nickel to get your last dime. So,
Yeah. It's it's clean living is
oh,
worth
you
it.
sleep better at night. Yeah.
Yeah. I spent a lot, as you know, a lot of time in New York City, and I knew not everyone, but almost every huge real estate person in New York City. And there were some that would say, you talk to them and say 100%, and you knew they didn't mean it.
And they would
Right?
say 100% like that they gave you 100% or they,
No, that they meant what they
oh,
said, that they would do whatever they said, and the words they often use that was a tell
mhm.
is they'd say 100%,
Yeah.
which meant it was not
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
right? It was a tell, right? Not the only tell, obviously, and then there are others that wouldn't screw you if it was the last nickel in their pocket.
Mhm.
They just
Mhm.
wouldn't, just not the way they were made, and then everybody in between,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Hmm.
I think to have been that you've been entrusted and you've built this trusted network of peer to peer, then obviously tells something about your values. And I think last time I may have asked you about your values.
I just it all comes down to loving kindness. It's really
Yeah.
simple. You just go from there. Yeah, I think it's really simple.
There was a question that I sent you, and it had to do with something along the lines of at some point, does influence become more valuable than ownership? And I think you just spoke to that, that you
Yeah,
had and have this influence that you could go to your network and say, I'd like to raise 3 million or 5 million or whatever that number is. And that's influence. But you also realize that that influence, even if it outlives you, that it's not that you own this building or this skyscraper in New York City or a ranch in Utah or wherever. I mean, that's ownership, but influence is like I could pick up the phone and that door opened and they trusted me and I didn't necessarily have to give them the due diligence pitch for 60 minutes with the PowerPoint presentation.
yeah, it's true. It's true. It works.
So, circling back to legacy, then you'll have to be a guest on my podcast in the future. And I think that
My pleasure.
you've made some really good decisions by engaging your children. That life threw you a curveball. You probably didn't anticipate getting a divorce. The divorce happened. Then it begs the question of, okay, now how do I rebuild and put one foot in front of the other? And I've got a team with me. So how do I bring the team and we can all make good choices and healthy choices and have us be, very street smart in New York City or wherever they all grew up. And so, I think that's a part of when you engage in real life, because real life is hard. I go back to the school of hard knocks, but this is how we did it. And I hope it gets distilled somewhere as documentation in addition to the conversations, because I'm sure a part of the character that you have and your children have is because you had those conversations that you made at the time.
Yeah, it hasn't been distilled somewhere. I think it has footprints, in places, and the it turns out that my kids are good people, so there's part of it right there, right? They're people you'd want to be around, right? So that's a good thing. Probably enough. Like I'm not really wrapped up in the whole what's my legacy. And so I also happen to think that I've got, you know, 3 years ago I would have said to you I have 32 more years
Mhm,
left because that's what the numbers
mhm.
say. That's going to change. I think it's going to change because of the advances that are being made. And I'm also hyper focused on being diligent about what I eat, going to the gym every day, all that kind of stuff that is really important, especially at this age. And it works, right? It's working.
Yeah, I
So
know last time you
I
shared
think,
that you started lifting weight because your girlfriend lifts weights, if I recall correctly.
well, she's a athletic trainer by
Okay.
profession. And so for 20 years in New York City, even though I was a member of a good gym, I might work out once every month. The workout I got is, walking to the Danielle to have a cocktail and then going to dinner to Paris Match around the
Mhm.
corner, and so I wasn't really paying attention to that physical activity, even though I walked a lot in New York, which
Mhm.
helped. But because of her diligence in getting me to go to the gym every day, it's been huge.
Mhm.
I just went on a 4.5 hour hike at 9,000 feet in the mountains over the weekend with 70% of the air that's normally available in because of the altitude, and it was piece of cake,
Good, good.
right?
You look happy and healthy.
I'm super
Yeah.
happy. Like, I'm so
So
grateful every
so
day.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna circle it back to legacy for a moment. So I know sometimes people think of legacy in terms of ego because I got that speech from my dad. And I also
Mhm.
think when you speak about this idea of living longer, and there's articles written now about longevity and people living longer, et cetera. I think it's the legacy might also be, what are you going to do with your time now? And how are you going to deploy your resources, if at all? Because now you're getting more selective. You're going to choose to go for that hike. You're not required to go to that gym in New York City 3 times a week or 4 times, you choose. And so it's like, now what are you choosing? You can convince your network to invest 3 million in something or not. And it's how are you
Right.
making choices now that you're older and wiser? And a part of it is, when you're young, you throw all that paint against a wall because you want something to work. But then when you get older, you're like, I don't know if I'm going to choose to make that much effort. My choices are going to become more selective, more intentional.
That is absolutely true, and that's been going on for me in an intentional way of being intentional about who I spend my time with, who I talk to, what I do with the limited amount of time presumably I would have
Mhm.
left, but everybody has
Mhm.
their same hours of the day. I don't do anything that somebody else can do. I try not to do anything that somebody else can
Mhm.
do. And I'd rather just sit and read a book in my backyard than most anything else. But I'm still lit up and juiced by, the two trades that I did because of the people I've known 15 years that printed money for five people. We all made a lot of money.
Mhm.
Like, I'm still excited about that. Right.
Oh, I'm sure the wheels are still turning.
No
Yeah,
doubt.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think
Yeah.
the good news is, like, with your children, you're not hurting cats because they've got a good foundation. I think for some families, particularly if 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made, they may not have prepared well enough because they didn't know how to prepare. And I don't think preparation necessarily has to do with money. Like, there's a difference between money and class. I think that your father was probably incredibly hardworking and so
Yep.
still gave you a foundation regarding a work ethic and respect and values, et cetera. So, but I think with some families out there, like if they have to deal with crazy, then it is like herding cats. I mean, your life when you're like, oh, and I chose to read a book, that's like peace. You've got peace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, I think that what you are doing is when you saw that back then there was a gap, there was something that said to you that I need to fill this gap. And you actually went as far as to saying, wait a minute, I'm probably not prepared to be the person to fill that gap until I learn more about it, which you
Mhm.
did. And so now you're credentialed on some level in a professional way to do that. And then you're executing on it. So good for you. Like, and I think there's also a huge need for it,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
doubt.
Although once you step into the arena, people don't necessarily care about the credentials. It's, "Can you solve my problem?"
Yeah, but when they see you on the YouTube channel and your podcast, and then they look at your background, they go, "Okay,
"Oh, I've been through the school of
hold on."
hard knocks." Yeah. Yeah. And I think that
Listen, I get criticized, not criticized, but there was a time in my life I'm a college dropout. Like, I dropped out of
Mhm.
college, start a business, like a lot of other people did, and so nobody gives a shit
That's
anymore.
correct. That's correct. It's what value.
But I'm also not applying for a job anywhere either,
Yeah.
and I have not had one, right? So,
Yeah. I wanna leave you with one thought before we close about narcissists. Yeah.
please.
Sometimes when they become confused later on in life, that's a good thing because the stuff is, and I call the stuff, it's like the furniture in their head is moving around. And if they start to feel confused, then they're questioning their beliefs of, is that still true? Do I still have to be motivated by shame or fear? Do I still have to exert as much control? Can I let my guard down and let other people in? Sometimes people think if
Mm,
somebody's confused, it's a bad thing, but sometimes it's that their programming is wearing away. And when I say programming, might have been whatever it was that influenced them, before age 18. And now that they're getting older, that's starting to wear away and they can start to question things. And that's always a positive sign. And that means that progress is being made inside of their head. Now, whether or not they tell the people around them is another story. But if they
yeah.
say something along the lines of, like, well, I'm not sure if that's true, or I've got a conflicting thought about that now, that means that they are growing. and there is a little bit of hope.
I like that. I will give you the extreme part of that, if you don't
Please,
mind.
please.
So my mother was passive aggressive, like terrible person for the most part. She didn't really mean to be, but she didn't have a pattern that wasn't other than that because her parents were like that. And so as she got older and she slipped into dementia like a lot of people
Mhm.
do, she didn't have the brain power or whatever, the will to execute on her narcissism
Mhm.
anymore. So she was never happier during that time that she had
Mhm.
dementia, and everybody else around her was never
I
happier.
bet, I bet.
She couldn't execute.
Yeah.
And, my siblings all recognize this and we laugh about it now, but, it's not exactly what you said, but she didn't cognitively come to the realization that maybe some of the stuff wasn't true that she believed. It's her cognition weakened, so she couldn't execute it on you anymore. It was funny
Yeah.
to see it happen. She was the happiest she ever was in
I
her
think it's
life.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people that have to control everyone else, I've seen many times that what ends up happening is towards the end of their life, they can't even control their own mind. It's like, I don't know if it's karma, I don't know what it is, but,
Yeah, it could be
yeah,
complicated.
I I
Yeah.
I will say this for women, but also for males, but women especially don't give themselves what they need. And what I mean by what they need, and maybe your girlfriend has talked about this, but she probably gives herself what she needs if she's a personal trainer. It's enough sleep. It's setting aside 30 or 60 minutes a day to just exercise, to like give to
Mm.
yourself versus emptying the cup so much that you end up being the bitch because you've given so much away that you get to this point of like, you just break.
It's overwhelming, yeah. Fortunately, Mary's been super disciplined all her life. She was a Brooklyn girl, worked 3 jobs, took the train 2.5 hours to school, meal prepped every day because she had no family life to speak of, and she just, was president of her class in school, went to one of the best new schools in Brooklyn. So she's hyper disciplined and methodical, which I'm disciplined by
Mhm.
proxy on that type of stuff, going to the gym and all that. But otherwise, I'm like bouncing from one thing to another, right? So, well, you've been very kind to let me talk about me, and it's all your
It's
fault.
my pleasure.
So there.
I think that's what
Yeah.
makes it real.
Yeah.
If not, I'm really reading
I
from the
don't,
teleprompter of my notebook.
you've been awesome. I want to do this again in a couple months, if
I'd
that's
be happy
okay.
to, and you'll have to come on to my show one day when you're ready.
What I'm
Okay.
ready. You just tell me what do I, unless you tell me I'm not ready, if you think I'm going to send you a list of questions, I'm
No,
not.
but I will probably send a list of questions your way just so it doesn't feel like a deposition. I always want it to be a fun experience, and things can come up sometimes.
Yeah.
I want people to not think of their legacy as death and taxes, and most of the time, people will say, "Oh, my legacy. You mean my will, right?" And I'm like, "There's more." It's like one day when my parents pass, will I think about the will? No, I'll think about, the favorite foods that they had, their life journeys, the things that they always would tell me about. Like my dad would say, like, there's a difference between love and control, like those little sayings that kind of stick with you,
Yeah.
or the fact that I had to clean my room every Saturday morning before I received my allowance. And to this day, every Saturday morning I clean. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Good.
those
Yeah.
little things that, and also the stories, and knowing their background, like you had said about, knowing your family's background. I think some of it, if you can go back, it's great. If you can, wonderful. If you can't, it's still, you've got your own journey. Like if I mention again that 2/3 of the days affluent or self-made, kudos for being the pioneer. Kudos for outgrowing your parents. Because there may have been a point where you said, "Oh, I only thought I'd make 40,000 a year," and then you made 400,000 or 4 million or 40 million or whatever it was.
Mm.
And
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, in my case, they'd been for the for it didn't take long for them to not have any idea what I was doing, and there was no point in even talking about it, right? But it's okay.
cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll schedule something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, please. Angelina, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for being here and joining us, and till next time. Thank you.